Debug mode was introduced in a previous video, and the purpose of this video is just to run through a bunch of details about debug mode. The first thing to remember is that debug mode is a mode. It's a property of the script. When you throw the switch that turns on debug mode for a script, you're asking Script Debugger to bring in a whole bunch of magic that's special to Script Debugger. In particular, this means that if you save a script while it's in debug mode, although this isn't illegal and in fact in certain cases can be very useful, you've put the script into a special state. To show this, the script has a special icon. I'll save this script. Notice how the icon in the title bar changes, and if we look in the Finder, we see the same thing. So, unless you're planning to continue debugging the script with Script Debugger, you normally won't save it in debug mode like this. Debug mode introduces a lot of extra overhead into the script, and you won't want that overhead to be present for normal execution of the script. And you certainly wouldn't want to give a script saved in debug mode to anyone else. So, unless you have good reason to do otherwise, it's a good idea to remember when you're done debugging, turn off debug mode for the script and save it. However, if you're in the middle of debugging and you haven't finished and you need to leave Script Debugger and quit it, that would be a good reason to leave the script in debug mode. The reason is that if you put the script back into normal mode and save it and close it, all your breakpoints will be lost. You can edit your script in debug mode, but you cannot edit your script if it is paused in the middle of debugging. If I try to insert any text while we're paused, I'll get this dialog warning that I can't make any changes because we're paused in the middle of debugging. So you have to stop the script. Once you're well and truly stopped, the script becomes editable. Besides execute, there's also trace. Trace is just like execute or resume. You can start tracing either from the beginning of a script or resume by tracing when you're paused someplace. The difference is that trace inserts a short pause at every executable line. To dictate the length of the pause that'll be inserted, hold the mouse down on the trace button until you see the menu. Move the mouse over the menu. Now you can manipulate this tortoise and the hare slider. It's useful while tracing to keep your eye on the variables and the call stack at the same time. You learn a lot that way. And to illustrate, I'll just start tracing this script from the beginning. It doesn't look like we're getting anywhere, but in fact we're looping around the repeat block, so we're executing that line many times. Now we've dived into longest identical, we've dived into length of shortest, looping around inside length of shortest. Now we've gone on to longest identical. Now one nice thing about trace is that because it's a lot slower, it's possible to pause. So when you reach the point where you want to pause, click the pause button. Of course, trace obeys breakpoints as well, so if the path of execution encounters a breakpoint where we'd normally break, we will in fact break. We'll pause there. Notice that not only execute, but also trace, step over, and step into all have the little pop-down menu that allows you to execute just one particular handler. The reason Stepout doesn't have it is that you can't initiate execution of a script by stepping out. Everything that I'm showing you from the toolbar can also be done from the script menu. So execute appears in the script menu and you can pick one of those handlers there. Trace appears in the script menu and you can govern the speed of tracing and you can pick one of those handlers there. Same thing for step over, step into, and so on. Now you probably noticed that circles appeared in the gutter while the script was executing in debug mode. I'll just execute the entire script to make that happen. So there are the circles. Those are code coverage marks. A circle next to a line means that the path of execution did pass through that line. And the relative sizes of the circles indicate how many times execution passed through that line. So here's a very large circle. You can hover the mouse over a circle to get the exact number of times that the path of execution passed through that line. So this is large, and we passed through that one 60 times. This one is small. We passed through it only once. You can turn off the code coverage feature if you don't want to see it. Or you can leave it on, and if you're paused in the middle of a script and you want to clear the code coverage, you can choose Script Clear Code Coverage. Code coverage is also cleared automatically when execution of a script begins. Now I want to go into a little more detail on things you can do with breakpoints. The simplest way to set a breakpoint is just to click in the gutter at that line. If you click again on that breakpoint, the breakpoint stays, but it's disabled. That means the breakpoint will have no effect if the path of execution reaches it. The path of execution will just pass right through as if there were no breakpoint there. Click again, and the breakpoint will be enabled again. If you watch the Breakpoints inspector at the same time as you enable or disable a breakpoint, you can see the enabled or disabled status of the breakpoint reflected in the Breakpoints inspector by the checkbox in the first column. This breakpoint is now enabled, now it's disabled, now it's enabled again. And of course you can make exactly the same change in the Breakpoints inspector. Enabled, disabled. To remove a breakpoint, Control-click the breakpoint and choose Remove Breakpoint. Alternatively, click anywhere in that line and choose Script, Remove Breakpoint. Probably the easiest way is to Control-click on that line in the Breakpoints inspector and choose Delete. Now there's also such a thing as a temporary breakpoint. A temporary breakpoint is a breakpoint. It acts like a breakpoint when the path of execution reaches it, but at that moment the breakpoint is removed. The simplest way to convert a breakpoint to a temporary breakpoint is to Option-click on the breakpoint. This is now a temporary breakpoint. To prove that, I'll execute the script. The path of execution will reach this breakpoint, will pause, but the breakpoint will be removed. Behind the scenes, a temporary breakpoint is how the Execute to Here feature works. When you say Execute to Here, what actually happens is a temporary breakpoint is set at that line, and the script begins to execute or resumes. In addition to Execute to Here, there's also Trace to Here, and it's exactly the same thing. We're setting a temporary breakpoint and giving the command to begin or resume tracing. Keep an eye on the status bar here. It really gives you a sense of what's happening while we're tracing. If all of that isn't enough to control the execution of your script, Script Debugger gives you a very powerful breakpoint dialog. You can decide that we're not going to pause until a certain condition is satisfied. For example, until we've hit that breakpoint a certain number of times, or until a certain AppleScript expression is true. Another thing you can do in this dialog is that you can say what should happen when we do hit that breakpoint. For example, we could log a message at that point, and then instead of pausing at the breakpoint, we could simply resume. For example, recall all the stuff that I had to go through in a previous video in order to debug what was going on at this point. We executed, we hit that breakpoint, and then I started watching this variable LL, trying to figure out whether the script was behaving correctly. So I'll resume and hit the breakpoint, resume and hit the breakpoint, resume and hit the breakpoint, resume and hit the breakpoint. And this was the point where things began to go wrong. At this point we should have returned from longest identical, but we didn't. I'll use the breakpoint dialog so that this is the first place where we actually pause in the script. Notice that each item of LL is 15 characters long. So I'll stop, and I'll say when length of item 1 of LL is 15. Now I have to specify something here, so I'll say is true. Then pause. And why don't I put something in the status bar? So I'll say length is now 15. That'll show that things are behaving the way I expect. Okay, so the script is now stopped, so I'm going to begin from the beginning, and here we go. And here we are paused at the breakpoint. My status message appears in the status bar in square brackets at the end of the message that Script-Debugger itself has already placed there. And if we take a look at the value of LL, the strings have indeed been reduced to the point where I want to start investigating why things have gone wrong. So with a single breakpoint, I was able to arrive at exactly the point, exactly the specific iteration in this loop where I want to start working out what it is that's happening in the script. Finally, I want to show you the mini debugger window. The mini debugger window is useful when you have a script that drives some scriptable application with an interface, and you'd like to watch the interface of that scriptable application as the script works. For example, here I have a script that drives BBEdit. It passes through the text of the frontmost document in BBEdit, and if it finds a word beginning with T, it changes the T to a capital T. It's a silly script, but it illustrates my point. Now, it would be nice to have BBEdit's window be frontmost while the script runs. And I could try to arrange that by activating BBEdit each time through the loop. But then, as you see, what happens is we keep switching back and forth between BBEdit and Script-Debugger. So I'll resume, we go to BBEdit, we come back to Script-Debugger. And we go back and come back. Now you can try to get out of that with some preferences. So there's a preference that says bring Script-Debugger to the foreground when scripts pause. So you could uncheck that. Okay, so I'll start all over. All right, so we activated BBEdit and we didn't go back to Script-Debugger. Okay, but now I can't control Script-Debugger, so I have to switch back to Script-Debugger in order to resume. The mini debugger window is the perfect solution to all of this, and you can summon it in two ways. If you're in Script-Debugger, you could say Window, Mini Debugger. Alternatively, if you're in the scriptable application with Script-Debugger in the background, you can choose Mini Debugger from Script-Debugger's dock menu. The Mini Debugger window is a floating window, so I'm still in BBEdit, but I've got this window sort of injected from Script-Debugger floating in front of BBEdit. And it's sort of a minimal version of a script window. So I can see the text of the script, and I can see the gutter, and I can even create and deactivate and activate breakpoints. And most important, I can control the execution of the script. So I'll start the script, and I'm paused at the breakpoint, and now I'll resume. And the first word beginning with T has been capitalized, and I'll resume again. And the next word beginning with T has been capitalized, and I'll resume again and again. And that's the end, and Script-Debugger signifies this by bringing itself to the front. Again, that's in accordance with a preference. That was a very simplified example, but clearly you can use the mini debugger window so that you can continue interacting with some scriptable application and work your way through a script that drives that application at the same time.